I think we're in a turning point in human history, where many of the institutions that have served us well for decades or even centuries are now unable to take us forward. They're stalled, they're in atrophy, they're frozen, they're in various stages of failure. And that we need to rebuild them around a whole new media and a whole new model. Now, for some reason, I seem to end up on the same platform with Paul Krugman a lot these days. And we were speaking at a conference in Berlin, and he got up and he said, you know, here's what's going on. When you have a meltdown of the financial system, you get a prolonged period of slump. Japan had one in 1992. They're still in a slump, he said. And so we should get ready for a couple of decades of ugliness. And that's the good news scenario, because bad things can happen, like one of these 5 countries in Europe that have a sovereign debt crisis. If they default on their sovereign debt, that'll bring down the euro. Europe will go into a depression. The whole global economy could go into a real depression. Now, far be it from me to debate with a Nobel Prize-winning economist, but my view, and I'm of the theory that the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future than the one that he outlines. But if we're going to do that, we need to understand what the problem is. And the problem is not within the framework of traditional economists. The problem is not about the business cycle. This is not a secular change that we're going through, it's a secular change. The industrial age is finally run out of gas. And this is what I describe in my new book, Macroeconomics, available for sale after this event, right outside the door. The way to buy the book, by the way, is in massive volume. Seriously, the industrial age brought us many wonderful things, and it brought us all kinds of institutions. But they're failing. The Industrial Age Corporation, typified by America's greatest company, General Motors, it went bankrupt. The financial services industry collapsed. And it needs more than just a new regulation in the United States. It needs a whole new modus operandi based on openness and integrity and interdependence. If there's one thing we should learn from this current crisis, it's that business can't succeed in a world that's failing. Newspapers are going bankrupt. 70 newspapers in North America have gone under. The problem that newspapers solve, the huge costs and complexity of organizing the news and presenting it and distributing it, well, this is no longer a problem. As one youngster said to me, if the news is important, it will find me. Our systems for global problem solving can't solve problems. What's going on in the Mideast is not a result of our systems for global problem solving, it's in defiance of them. Our systems wanted the old status quo. Young people said, no, we want a new future. Universities are losing their monopoly on higher learning. You know, the smartest kids, I'm convinced, in Canada, they don't go to lectures. The big thing is to get an A without having ever gone to a lecture. As one youngster said to me at Harvard, why would I go to a lecture of a TA talking to 200 people? You can hardly ask a question, and the topic is Peter Drucker, when I can go online and interact with a real-time Peter Drucker. All of these institutions are based on an old model, like the old media. Mass media, mass production, mass education. It's one-to-many, one-size-fits-all, focused on the deliverer, the teacher. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge. You're a student, you're an empty vessel, you don't. Get ready, here it comes. You know, mass democracy. I'm a politician. Vote for me and then listen to me broadcast to you for 4 years, and then we get to do it all over again. Mass health care, you know. I'm a clinician, you're a patient. You don't have knowledge, I do. You get health care when you come into the system, and you don't get to collaborate. You know that risk, or the number one risk factor in health, is isolation. Now, for each of these old industrial age institutions, they're contrasted today by these sparkling new initiatives of people just self-organizing to reorganize these institutions around a whole new open, networked, collaborative model. This is a time of amazing change that we're going through right now, and you're right in the center of it. Now, this is not a new idea. I've been writing about this for 30 years. Not all my books have been bestsellers. I wrote a book in 1981 about the internet, and my mother bought most of those. I think it was like a study in bad timing. But you may remember Alvin Toffler. He wrote a book, it's got to be almost 30 years ago, called The Third Wave, Agrarian, Industrial, I think he called it an information wave or something like that. These are not new ideas, but they're ideas who were waiting for something to happen. Their time had not come. You know the idea. Back a few hundred years ago around the world, we had agrarian economies, and the means of production was called feudalism, and knowledge was concentrated in a tiny handful, oligopoly. People didn't know about things. I mean, you were born and you died. There was no concept of progress. But with Johannes Gutenberg's great invention, people started to have knowledge. And over time, the institutions of feudal agrarian society appeared to be stalled or frozen or in atrophy or failing. It didn't make sense for the church to be responsible for medicine when people had knowledge. It didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to make all the decisions in society. People didn't want to be just subjects. So we had the rise of parliamentary democracy. There was the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. There was the creation of the corporation and commercial relationships, and eventually the Industrial Revolution, and it was all good. It advanced the standard of living and created nation states and created the world that we know today. Well, once again, the technology genie is out of the bottle, but this time it's very different. The printing press gave us access to the written word. The internet enables each of us to be a producer of the written word and all media content. The printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The internet gives us access to the knowledge contained in the crania of other humans on a global basis, real time. This is taking us into nothing less than a new age. Now let me bring it down to earth a bit here. And I'm going to talk to you about 5 things. Why is this happening? I'd like to talk to you about the music industry, which is the canary in the mine shaft, about what's happening with publishing, about what's happening with broadcasting and television, which is this TV is this really cool new internet app, and I'd like to talk to you about the film, because I think we're moving into a period where the movie and the movie industry will be reinvented. So first of all, what were these ideas waiting for? Well, they were waiting for some big changes. They were waiting for a technology revolution, the rise of a ubiquitous computational platform that was rich in media. And the internet is now a big computer. And on this computer are running all these cool apps. And the internet is now geospatial. The old web, you surfed the web. The new web, you surf reality. Anyone here seen Google goggles or Layer? You take your little device and you go outside and you look and it says, this is the Canadian Parliament buildings. You see it on the screen here, and you're saying, what's the tourism layer? Or give me where are the ATM, where are the ATMs layer? Or are there men's shoe stores around here, and so on. This is the intersection of the physical and digital world. We access the web not through the first screen, TV in the old sense, or even the second screen, computers, but it's the third screen now. It's these ubiquitous mobile devices, and I call it the thing. I was doing a session last week, and the CIO of Hyatt was in the audience. There was a bunch of CIOs, and I said to him, how soon before your BlackBerry, your iPod enables you to, is the key to the door in the room? He says, we're about a year away from that. I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address, and all these things talk to each other. I have no idea what his refrigerator says to his toaster. But he was actually bragging that his fence talks to his sprinkler system. And I said, well, Ken, why would you care? And he says, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. So, I mean, this is pervasive, ambient, rich media computing. Now, secondly, these ideas were waiting for a demographic revolution. I can't really see you out there, but I can see a few of you. Who has kids under the age of 33? Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty prolific group. Who here is under the age of 33? All right, well done. Well, you all know what I'm talking about. We have the first generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language. And I started studying kids about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought my children are prodigies. And, but then I noticed that all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So I started working with about 300 kids. You may remember, some of you, in 1997, I wrote this book called Growing Up Digital, defined the net generation, digital divide, and a bunch of other ideas. Well, flash forward to today. They're not just growing up digital, they've grown up digital. And they're coming into the workforce, the marketplace, into society. They're the big consumers of media. And there's no more powerful force to change every institution than the first generation to come of age in the digital age. It was a Canadian, a demographer, David Foote, who popularized the idea of boom, bust, and echo. The baby boom, then the birth rate dropped off for a period of 12 years, and then the echo. The boomers started having kids around 1978. And we can see this in all kinds of data. This is school enrollment in the United States. Boom, bust, echo. But we don't get this yet. We talk about the aging of the population. I'm not sure that's a good term. The population's not just aging, it's bifurcating. If we understood this, we'd know certain things like why the schools are in crisis in Canada. There's a huge wave of young people in the schools and especially the high schools and the universities. But we don't get this yet. We say, yeah, the schools are in crisis. I know. What should we do? I don't know. Why don't we cut back on funding for education? Maybe that'll help, you know? I mean, we don't understand this yet. Now, this is not just an echo, and we call it the boomlet. That's a bad term too. The echo's louder than the original. You care about media? This is bigger than the baby boom. 7.8 million boomers in Canada. There's 8 million of this echo generation. Now, you know, it was 15 years ago. I had to try and name the generation. They're not Gen Y. It doesn't seem right to give them a letter to follow on to the demographically puny Gen X. Or some people call them the millennials, but I don't know. The fact that the year 2000 came and went, that didn't affect the experience of youth. What did? Well, this is the first generation to come of age in the digital age. Computers, the internet, interactive technologies are part of the experience of youth. And time online is not taken away from hanging out with your friends, learning the piano, talking to your parents, or doing your homework. Time online for this generation is taken away from television. The baby boomers watch 24 hours a week of TV per kid. These kids watch a lot less TV and they watch it differently. They come home, they turn on their computer, they're in 3 different windows, they're talking to their friends, they're texting, and they got an MP3 file going and 3 magazines open and a video game. Oh yeah, they're doing their homework at the same, and in the background the TV might be going, but the TV is like ambient media. It's sort of like music. And when they're on, they have their programs, but often they watch them asynchronously. They time shift, right? Meaning they can cut out the ads as well. And when they're online, what are they doing? Well, rather than being a passive recipients of somebody else's media, they're reading and organizing stuff and composing their thoughts and telling their stories. This is changing the way a generation thinks.